So hello everyone. My name's Jack Sullivan. Let me just go to the next slide. There we go. My name's Jack Sullivan. I'm a solicitor. I practice in Canterbury at Cooper and Co. Solicitors, and I'm also a part-time lecturer at the University of Kent, Kent Law School. I'm not going to give too much information about what area I practice in, and you'll understand why in a few minutes. But in a nutshell, you'll see that the talk is about finding your niche and how to stand out in practice and shape the law. And hopefully it'll make sense what I'm talking about as we get on. It's a fairly self-explanatory webinar, and no previous knowledge of the law is expected or required. Okay, so I'm hoping you can all get use out of this. But I'll say from the get-go that one of the main things I want to achieve is to challenge some assumptions that you might have about the law or about working in law. Okay. And so I want you guys to get involved. It can be a bit lonely doing a webinar, just hearing myself yap on for an hour or so. So I do want some interaction if you're feeling up to it. And so I want to start by getting a flavour of what kind of area of law you think that you want to practice in. My understanding is that most of the people attending this webinar are aspiring lawyers, but may not have started your legal education yet. You wouldn't have started your undergrad degree. Some of you might have done, and that's great. But whatever your situation is, whatever your current level of experience is in law, just pop in the chat for me what area you think you want to go into at this stage. There's no wrong answer. So we're saying a couple of people are saying corporate law straight off the bat. International law, criminal law, human rights law, family law, real estate. Okay, I'll give you a minute or so to pop down any other ideas. Okay, lots of criminal law, lots of corporate law. They seem to be the favorite two. Some human rights law as well. Okay, now that's interesting. So I'll tell you what area of law I practice in now, and it's animal law. So probably not what you were expecting. It's certainly not an area of law that immediately comes to mind, I don't think, when most people think of the law and what they might like to specialize in. I was expecting lots of you to say corporate crime, family, and property, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think what I want to achieve here in this webinar is to start making you think a bit more laterally, thinking a little bit outside the box, and realize that there are actually more opportunities in law than you may at first have realized. So if you do want to study law or work in it, my advice is to not box yourself in to an area of specialism too soon and to keep your options open for as long as you possibly can. I'll explain why that matters and how thinking a little bit differently can sometimes take you to places you never would have imagined. Okay. Now, hopefully that's enough to entice you to stay for the next 50 minutes or so. But okay, let's carry on. The power of having a niche. And I think to give you some more context would be useful. So I've said I specialize in animal law, but what does that really mean? What does my day-to-day workload look like? And it's quite varied. So I deal with criminal cases where a dog owner is potentially being prosecuted after their dog's bitten somebody. I deal with personal injury claims. Again, following an injury somebody suffered as a result of an animal that they own, I defend those personal injury cases. I deal with a lot of ownership disputes between separated couples or maybe an individual and a rescue that they've rescued an animal from, about where ownership lies, custody battles involving animals, that kind of thing. And I do lots of breach of contract claims. So imagine, for example, you've bought an animal, you've bought a pet, and a few days after you've bought that pet, it passes away of a genetic condition. You say, oh, yeah, I've spent thousands of pounds on that pet. Can I get my money back? They're the kinds of claims I get involved in. And so you'll see, although the subject matter is niche, in that nearly all of what I do involve animals, actually the areas of law it covers are quite broad. I'm dealing in criminal law, personal injury law, contract law. It is broad. So that's what I mean when I think laterally. Don't box yourself in. Actually, when you dig a little bit deeper, you realize there's lots of layers to the law and there's lots of interesting opportunities that don't at first come to mind. But why bother making a niche? Why should you not just jump into crime or jump into family or jump into corporate? And there's nothing wrong with jumping into any of those areas, I should say. But why should you look at alternative options that may be available to you? Well, I think there's a few key benefits, and I've put them up on the slide there. The first and probably most obvious one is that it makes it easier to stand out from the crowd. Everyone knows that law is a competitive industry. Training contracts are sought after. So pupilages, if you want to be a barrister, and even vacation schemes and mini pupilages, those work experience opportunities that come before you then apply to your first formal role as a qualified lawyer. Lots of people leave university, leave law school with a first or a 2-1. Good academics are expected if you want to make it in law. And lots of people have other experiences that might be relevant. Lots of people have done a week's work experience here and there. But actually having a niche and having an interest in a particular area of law that you're able to demonstrate. It's not just saying you've got an interest, but showing how, or proving that you've got that interest. That's one way of really making your application stand out. So that's one advantage of carving out a niche for yourself. Another is that it's easier to build a brand and become the go-to person in whatever particular field it is that you're deciding to specialize in. You know, I often find it funny now whenever I'm at the university doing some lecturing or I'm at a networking event in the city that I practice, I can come up to people that I've never met before, and as soon as I say, "Oh, well, I specialize in animal law," people turn around and say, "Oh, you're Jack. You're that dog lawyer. You're that animal lawyer," and I only qualified fully as a solicitor about 4 months ago, and it's rewarding already having a reputation for what you do. You think of it as being a bigger fish in a little pond. The more you find your niche and you narrow it down that way, and especially at the start of your career, that can bring lots of benefits with it. For example, it can help attract high profile cases. If you're getting a name for yourself as being the go-to guy in your field, well, if there's a big case in that field, you might be the door that they knock on. Um, Similarly, it makes you more likely to enjoy your job, I think. I went into animal law because I'm passionate about helping animals. I often joke that I prefer animals to humans, and I'm sure lots of you might agree with that. And so it's quite refreshing being able to see my clients as animals rather than their owners, who are the humans. As I love what I do because every day I go to work, I go out and I tell myself what I'm doing is to try and secure animal welfare where I can, and that's really rewarding. I personally wouldn't get that level of job satisfaction if I'd gone into corporate or commercial, that type of work. Lots of people do, but it's a personal choice. So if you can find a niche in something that you're really interested in, you're more likely to get that job satisfaction, and I think that's a really valuable thing. And when all of those benefits coincide, and you've got high profile work, you're enjoying your job, you've become the go-to voice in the particular area that you've carved out a niche in, and you're standing out from the crowd, that's a recipe for a really good thing because I think it helps you become more able to actually change the law and make a real difference for society within your particular field. And I know lots of people, myself included, go into law with the view to contribute and make a real difference. And my view is that if you have a niche for yourself, you make it a lot easier to do that. So let's look at a case study then. I'm not just telling you that interesting, exciting opportunities can come your way if you consider carving out a niche in law. Here's an example of how I think I've actually done that. So I want to start with a poll here, okay? Because I want you to think about how you think pets should be seen in law, okay? So if you've got a pet owner, this is going to be particularly poignant for you. But do you think that pets in law should be recognised as a family member? Do you think they should be recognised as an item of furniture, say no different to a chair or a toaster? Or do you think they should be their own legal category? So not a cherished member of the family, but also not an item of furniture. We should make its own, they're a distinct category just for pets. How do you think they should be treated in law? I'll give you a minute or so to complete that poll once you've had a thought. Okay, so the results are out. 61% of you think that pets should have their own legal category in law. 39% of you think that the law should recognize pets as a member of the family. And interestingly, none of you, not a single participant to this webinar, thinks that pets should be seen as an item of furniture, say a chair or a toaster. Well, then it may surprise you to know that currently in law, pets are considered chattels, which is the legal word for possessions no different to furniture such as a chair or a toaster. So, although no one attending this webinar thinks that pets should be recognised that way, that is indeed how they are recognised. Now, for lots of people who perhaps don't specialise in this area, that won't be a problem. Okay, we don't give them legal recognition, but what effect does that have in practice? There may be lawyers who have 1 to 2 cases involving an animal in a 10-year career that themselves might not recognise it's a problem. But when you carve out a niche for yourself and you become a specialist in one particular area, you start to see why problems like that are problematic and can have knock-on consequences that can be fairly severe. So in ownership disputes between separated couples, for example, because courts aren't compelled to consider the welfare of an animal because they're just seen as property, you often see animals going to the owner that's clearly less able to look after them and meet their welfare needs. Similarly, if you've got a pet that's been injured or maybe even killed through somebody else's negligence, the amount of compensation you're likely to receive for a claim of that nature is going to be nominal. It's probably the open market value of your pet, which if it's, say, an 8-year-old crossbreed dog, it's probably not even worth £50 on the open market. Another example can be contract disputes. And it's the same principle. If there's a breach of contract regarding the well-being of a dog, if it's got a genetic condition, I'll use that example that I used at the start. The damages you could receive for that breach of contract claim could be limited again to the open market value of the pet. So we deal with enough of these cases at the firm that I work for to realize that this is a real problem. And it plays out time and time again and has a real impact on people's lives. We don't think that we would have been able to spot the significance of the problem if everyone at this firm didn't have that specialism, if we weren't working in that niche. And so we did something about it. We're fortunate to be in the position where we can recognize a problem, which makes us equally fortunate to be able to try and make a positive change within the law for the betterment of society. And so we started a campaign in which we started a petition to try and change the way that pets are seen as in law. We want to make pets seen as more akin to family than property, because we believe that's how society by and large views them. And the poll that we conducted demonstrates that clearly you guys agree with that most people do see pets more like family than property. So we started this petition. The BBC caught wind of it, and after that, I was invited to do 8 national, no, well, local BBC radio interviews across the country. I was on local BBC News here in the Southeast, and it then culminated on me being invited onto live national television, where I sat on the sofa at BBC Breakfast, being interviewed about this campaign. You can see some pictures up there on the slides. Um, Now, I'm not just saying that to blow my own trumpet by any stretch. I'm saying that to show you some of the benefits and some of the exciting opportunities that can come from carving out a niche for yourself. Working in law doesn't have to be all about going to court or working from a tower block somewhere. Can certainly get lots of that if you want to, but you don't have to limit yourself to that. And my belief is that by carving out a niche for yourself, you're more likely to come across these exciting opportunities. Yet remember, I've only been fully qualified for 4 months, yet I've had an amazing opportunity like this. If I joined a corporate firm or a big family firm in the city, would I have had an opportunity like this? Probably not. So you've got to think what you want to get out of from a career in law, and start thinking about whether there are any other areas that might interest you where you can get opportunities like the one I was lucky enough to come by. Now, what I need to say on this is don't dismiss the mainstream areas. The purpose of this webinar is not to say that you shouldn't go into criminal law and you shouldn't go into corporate law. In fact, we need very good students going into those areas. And if you think that you've got great business acumen and you might be the next Alan Sugar and you're passionate about business, then by all means, you should go into business law if that's where your passion lies. Equally, there'll be lots of people that are passionate about criminal justice and they're aware of the challenges that our criminal justice system is currently facing. And they say, I want to go into criminal law to try and help correct some of those issues and improve the criminal justice system. And if that's what you're passionate about, then absolutely go and do it. But what I don't want to see students do is pigeonhole themselves into those mainstream areas of law because they don't realize they've actually got much greater choice. So how do you find your niche? How do you relate your interests into a legal career? Well, it's actually not that difficult when you start to think outside the box. And it's all about personality. You need to be yourself when you enter a career in the law. You shouldn't be what you think a lawyer should be like. It's personality, personality, personality. Some of the best lawyers I know, they didn't leave their personalities behind when they started law school. They lent into them. So your interests can become your legal brand. So if you're passionate about music and dance, maybe you should consider entertainment law as an option you've not thought about. If you play football, rugby, or another sport every weekend, well, it might be that sports law is an area for you. If you're into nature or you're lucky enough to own a boat and you go sailing often, maritime shipping law, environmental law is a really growing industry that's probably calling out for aspiring lawyers like you. Or if you're a gamer and your family struggle to pull you off of Fortnite or Call of Duty, IP and media law is going to have some relevance. There's a lot of crossover. Or animal law, if you want to follow in my footsteps and get into that particular niche, then we would certainly welcome you because animal law is another growing area and we're looking for more bright, aspiring animal lawyers. So hopefully now, as we carry on through this webinar, you can start having a think about your interests and your passions outside of the law and just start thinking, how could I relate that to an area of law that might give me a really rewarding, interesting legal career? So do mull that over as we carry on throughout the webinar. So how to build your brand. So you found a niche, you found something you're interested in. Now it's time to build a brand, build a name, build a reputation for yourself. That's what I mean when I say build a brand. And the good news is you don't even need to have started law school before you can start building that reputation. Once you've found a niche that interests you, you're away. So as soon as this webinar ends, if you really wanted to, I would encourage you, in fact, to go and start building that brand. And how do you do it? Well, there's a few ideas that I've put up on the slide there. First, you need to research your niche, read articles about it. What have lawyers said about it? What have other commentators and academics said about that particular interest in a legal sense? Find any case law that relates to your particular passion or interest. Read news articles. The important thing is to stay curious. And it might be that after researching how your interest translates into law, that actually you're not that interested in pursuing it from a legal sense as part of a legal career. And that's absolutely fine. You can pivot, you can research another potential interest. You've all got the luxury of, I'm guessing, being at the start of your legal journey, that you can pursue as many different areas or potential niches as you possibly want. So do use that luxury to your advantage. Once you've done the research, though, and you're confident that this looks good, you're starting to learn about it and what a career in that niche might look like, it's important that you showcase it. And LinkedIn is a really powerful tool here. If you haven't already got a LinkedIn profile, I'd urge you to get one straight away. Don't hang around. Do it after this webinar if you can. Um, just post as much as possible. That's what it's all about. It's all about visibility. It could be a simple post on LinkedIn saying, I've just read this news article about how pets are treated in law, and here's a few things that surprised me about it. If you post regular posts like that showing that you not only have an interest, but you're doing something about it, you're doing the research, and here's what you've learned, here are the takeaways, you're then demonstrating that interest. You're not just saying it. And it's important that you recognize that distinction. Don't worry about being an expert. Everyone's voice matters. The world of law is a constantly evolving one. There's lots of debate around the way in which law should evolve, what new legislation we should bring in, and everyone's got a valuable voice in that, particularly you as the younger generation of aspiring lawyers. So don't think that people aren't interested in what you have to say just because you're at the start of your journey. Actually, that gives your voice a sense of value that more experienced lawyers don't have. Network authentically is the next tip I would say, in terms of how to build a brand for yourself. And again, if you've got a LinkedIn profile, that's your starting point because it makes it very easy to look up professionals that work in your particular niche or field of interest and reach out to them. Even if it's again a simple message, hi, I'm an aspiring lawyer. I see that you work in this area. I'm really interested in following your footsteps. Have you got any tips? Or have you got 5 minutes for us to grab a coffee together? Don't be afraid. The proactive students that reach out and network authentically in that way are more likely to get ahead and make a successful career in that particular field. Also, ask your university to put you in touch with professionals, whether it's alumni who have gone on to do interesting things, or whether it's just a connection that your university has. They've got a book full of knowledge and full of contacts, and you'd be doing yourself a discredit if you didn't try and tap into that resource. And ultimately, this is all about creating a feedback loop. So the more you engage, the more you learn, the more you document that learning and give yourself a voice, the more visible you become to mentors, to recruiters, to law firms, to future employers. And ultimately, in a competitive industry like law, that is the kind of thing that sets you apart. You need to think of your brand as a story. So your LinkedIn, your CV, what you say in interviews, it should all portray, here's who I am, here's why I'm different from other candidates, and here's the difference I want to make to this area of law, and here's the difference I can make to this area of law. And by building a brand, you really set yourself up to be able to give detail on all of those points, and it should set you apart very nicely from other candidates. Okay, so how studying at Kent can help with that. And I think this is an important point because if you choose to study whatever university you study at, they are going to dictate the way that you learn the law, the way that you encounter the law early on in your legal journey. And a reason why Kent in particular can help you find your niche, find your area of interest that hopefully you can go on and thrive in, is because it's the critical legal thinking that Kent adopts. And if any of you have done any research into Kent, if you're thinking about coming here or if you've already been here, you'll know that Kent prides itself on being a critical law school. But what does that mean? What is critical legal thinking? Well, effectively, it means it doesn't just teach the black letter law. It doesn't just focus on what the law is. Instead, it focuses on why is the law the way it is, and who does that law affect? And they're the interesting questions because it lends itself to thinking laterally, thinking outside the box, which goes hand in hand with the mindset that you need to be able to pick a niche area of the law and specialize in it. So by coming and studying at Kent, you equip yourself with this critical mindset that could just be the key to unlocking a really niche specialism area of law that you can go on and work in and build a really successful practice in. You know, I studied myself at Kent, and it's where I learned that the law isn't fixed. It's constantly evolving. And sometimes people like you, people like me, we can be the ones that affect that change in the law. And for the reasons I've spoken about, that is a really exciting thing to do. Okay, so we're drawing to an end, but I did want to just recap on some of the three main takeaways here. Um, and I think I'll start by saying there's more to law than the obvious practice areas. So most people think it's corporate, it's family, it's crime, property. Those things are great, but I want you to start thinking that there are other areas out there that may be of interest to you, and have a think about what those could be. Secondly, I want you to remember that working in a niche area of law can help you stand out and make an impact. And that can lead to some exciting opportunities. Maybe you'll be the next ones on the BBC breakfast sofa. And finally, that your interests outside of the law can become your legal brand, and you can start building that brand today. So don't shy away from using your personality as part of your legal journey. Instead, actually embrace it. So that's the end of me talking on at you. But before I then open up to questions, I'm interested to know, now that you've heard the webinar, now that I've hopefully got you thinking about other areas of law that might interest you, if you could all just start putting in the chat an area of law that you now think that you would like to go and practice in, that's perhaps different from your first answer when we started this webinar. Can you think of any interests or passions that might relate to a different area of law? Okay, so we're already seeing some new ideas coming in. There's a few people saying media law. We've got a couple of people saying sports law as well, and we've even got one person saying animal law, which is very reassuring to an animal lawyer like myself. Still keep typing them in if you'd like to. No, that is very interesting. We've got somebody saying disability law or sports law. That is a very interesting area, actually. And somebody saying medical law as well. Okay, well, look, I'm going to take that as mission accomplished, because there's certainly some different answers there to the first time I asked the question. So look, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. I'm going to open up for Q&A. So either leave your questions in the chat, and I'll answer as many as I can. I think there is also a Q&A box which I'll turn my attention to. Okay, so no, please take your time to ask any questions. Okay, there's a few questions coming in now. So somebody's asked, they're starting their studies of law in 2025 at the University of Kent. That's always good to see. Is there any way I can get involved in supporting with the current petition? So I guess you mean our petition to change how pets are seen in law. And so absolutely, what I'll do is in the main chat box, I'll put in a link to the petition. A shameless plug, I know, but you asked the question, I didn't force it upon you. And anyone that's interested can have a look at the petition and sign it there. That should be in the chat box now. What area of law would you recommend initially starting off with? I think it's a difficult question to answer, because it's got to be personal to you. I wouldn't box yourself off into wanting and saying you're definitely going to start in any one area of law. I think you need to keep your options open for as long as you can. Apply to any roles that are of interest to you and see how you get on. And just because you have your first legal role, whether it's as a paralegal or whatever it might be, a legal assistant, that doesn't mean that you can't then change areas. So don't think that the moment you start off in one area, you can't easily pivot and go into another area. So I think my advice is actually to stay flexible for as long as possible. Somebody's asked, do I get instructed in farmed animal cases or is it mainly companion animals? Most of the work that I do is companion animals, but there are people in our firm that specialize in farmed animals. Okay, somebody's asked, what are the best resources you know for finding out what the day-to-day life of a person in a particular area of law is, other than just speaking to them? I think if it's a big firms often post lots of things on their website or on their social media about a day in the life of, and that can be a really good resource of having a look and seeing whether you would like that day in your life. But I'd say LinkedIn again I'm a big advocate for LinkedIn because the people that post often on LinkedIn, you do get an insight into what their day-to-day life is like. And if you think that it's of interest to you, it's very easy to follow up and just have a few questions put to them in the message function of LinkedIn. So I think that would be my biggest tip in response to that question. Somebody's asked, are writing articles an effective way to show interest in a niche subject of law? Absolutely. It goes back to what I was saying. First, you need to research your area because it's no good you just telling me that you've got an interest in, say, disability law. I want you to prove it to me. And if you can write an article about disability law, about how things could be done differently or what's done well already, and you can put that and you're brave enough to post that publicly, then absolutely, that I think that would be very impressive. So it's definitely an effective way to prove your interest in whatever specific field of law you decide to specialize in. Somebody's asked, have I always wanted to do animal law? I think not initially, because I didn't know that it existed as an area of law. And I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to give this webinar and help aspiring lawyers like you realize that there are more opportunities out there. I think I told myself I wanted to go into civil litigation. So I didn't want to be a big corporate lawyer. I don't think that lifestyle would have suited me. But I wanted to just get involved in as many different civil cases as possible. So civil cases, for those that don't know, tend to be just any old argument about money or property. Um, but so I wanted civil law to keep my options open because I couldn't find an area of law that was a perfect fit for me and my interests. And it wasn't until I came across and had some work experience with someone that specialized in animal law that I realized that was an opportunity for me. And that's where I realized that it was the first area that coincided with my interests and my passions. And I didn't look back since. So that's why it's important that you start asking yourself these questions about where your interests lie and how that might translate to a career in law, so that you don't blinker yourself off to those opportunities that may come your way. What's a typical day like for me working in animal law? It's different. People often say don't work with animal or children, and 99% of what I do involves animals. So it definitely keeps me on my toes. It's unpredictable. Um, Often work comes at you thick and fast because you can't plan what your animal's going to do and when. And so often people need legal advice when their animal's done something that perhaps they shouldn't have done or got themselves in a bit of bother. They needed that advice quickly. So, but I find that quick turnaround of work exciting. Yeah, expect the unexpected. Another thing I'll say on that, and I did touch on this at the start of the webinar, is that although the subject area of what I do is niche, most of my work involves animals. the area of law is broad. So, one minute I'm looking at a criminal case and I'm looking at the sentencing guidelines, and trying to reduce a potential sentence that my client might get. And in the next hour, I'm doing a pet custody battle. And although they're not treated as family, you've got to adopt the empathy that a family lawyer would have dealing with, child custody battles, because lots of people look at their pets in the same way that they look at their children. So although the law doesn't treat them in that way, it's a completely different mindset. And then the next hour, I might be dealing with a personal injury case. So I work in lots of different areas of law. It's just the subject matter that's often the same, and that's the niche part. And I enjoy keeping lots of the law alive in my brain. I get lots of very well paid, very renowned corporate lawyers from London ringing me up as a fairly newly qualified solicitor, in Canterbury, saying their animal's done something it shouldn't have done, and they don't know what the law is because all they're focusing on is the corporate law. Actually, there's lots of law that they're not using on a day-to-day basis. So I enjoy being able to carry on using the legal knowledge that I acquired throughout the 3 years of my LLB. Do you think that working as an animal lawyer is quite an emotional investment? I think it definitely is. People love their pets. Like I said, our whole campaign that we're doing is to try and make pets seen as family, not property. That tells you everything you need to know about how we think our clients view their pets. And so it definitely is an emotional investment, and which might not be for everybody, but for me personally, it's one of the main reasons I wanted to go into law. I did want to go into the law to try and make a difference, and make a real difference to real people with real problems, people on the ground, people who I could easily see. I could put myself into their shoes easily. I like the human element of the law, of a person. If a person comes to you with a problem that they weren't expecting to happen, it's devastated them. Often they come to you at the lowest ebb of their life because they've never encountered the law before. I mean, that can sound quite dramatic, seeing that I deal in animal law and not, serious crime or anything like that. But still, for lots of people, anytime they encounter the law, for them it is serious. But being able to help them navigate through those difficult challenges, those emotional challenges, I find really rewarding. Okay, I'm going to go through the chat to see any questions there as well. What would you say is the best way to help you decide if you've chosen the right niche? That's a really good question. What I'd say is that once you've found your niche and you're showcasing it, so you're talking about it, you're writing articles, you're making LinkedIn posts, you're engaging with that topic, you need to ask yourself, are you enjoying doing that? If you find yourself typing away at your computer, writing an article, and you think you're just writing it, for the sake of writing it because you remember that Jack Sullivan told you on that webinar that you need to build a brand for yourself, then it's probably not the right niche for you, because you're not engaged with it. From my experience, when you find the right interest, the interest that's the best fit for you, you'll really enjoy talking about it. In the same way that any hobbies or passions that you have outside of the law, you must enjoy talking about those hobbies and passions with friends and family who have the same hobbies and passions as you. This should be no different. You should lean into those interests, lean into those passions, and you should enjoy talking about and engaging with them. And when you get that kind of satisfaction from showcasing your interest in your new particular legal specialism, I think that's how you know that you found the right one. How has LinkedIn benefited you personally? Well, actually, I say I'm a big advocate for LinkedIn, and that's because it has benefited me immensely. So when I was in my second year of university, I had a good LinkedIn profile by that point because I was keen to try and get myself seen and build a voice for myself. And I actually saw an advert that was sent out by the University of Kent saying that there's a solicitor working locally who specializes in animal law. and he's looking for somebody to help him on an ad hoc basis. I thought I'm interested in applying for that because I've got a passion for animals and animal welfare. So I followed him on LinkedIn. I looked up the solicitor in question. I followed him on LinkedIn, and then lo and behold, we started talking on LinkedIn. He invited me in for a week's work experience. That turned into 2 weeks work experience. He then gave me a training contract as soon as I finished my LLB. And it's that solicitor that is still my boss to this date who took a chance on me, and I'm now a solicitor working for him. So if it wasn't for LinkedIn and me following him on LinkedIn in the first instance and having a good LinkedIn profile before I started talking to him, I don't think I'd be here practicing as a happy animal law solicitor today. So actually, what have I benefited from LinkedIn? Probably my whole career, or at least my career as it currently stands. Is a career in law well paid? Now, I get this question a lot. It certainly can be, but you should not be going into a career in law for the money because it is far, far, far from guaranteed. Okay. Um, I know lots of solicitors who are extremely well off, barristers as well, of course, but I equally know lots of lawyers who are struggling to get by. It depends on what area you practice in, it depends on how good you are. Um, there's lots of variables at stake. So if the money is the main reason pushing you towards pursuing a career in law, I would perhaps think again. Law is challenging. It's challenging academically. It's challenging in the sense that it's so competitive, and it's challenging. It's challenging emotionally. You're dealing with serious stuff as a lawyer, no matter what area of law you work in. Um, so if you don't have the passion for it, and it's just the money you're pursuing, I think you'll find it'll wear you down pretty darn quickly. Okay, I think I've got through most of the questions. What's the most interesting case you've worked on? Well, I can't go into detail on that, sadly, because of client confidentiality. But animal law, just because you go into a niche and you go into what's seen as a smaller area of law, it doesn't mean it can't land you prolific cases. I've had a case go to the Royal Courts of Justice, Courts of Appeal. My boss has had cases go to the European Court of Human Rights. So it can take you far and wide. And you can have very, very prolific cases, but I can't go into details of specific cases that I've done, unfortunately. Okay, I think that's everything. So I'm happy to hang by for a last few minutes in case new questions come up. And Laura, if you've seen any good questions that you think I've missed, then by all means, please do draw them to my attention. But I think we are drawing to a close.
Hi, Jack. I think just perhaps it might be helpful. You've mentioned how you're a solicitor, you've recently qualified. Would you mind just giving a brief explanation as to your route to qualification? So, how did you get to where you are today? That would be helpful for everyone, I think. But otherwise, I think you've covered everything. Thank you.
Perfect. Now, of course. So I did my LLB at Kent. I was there between 2019 and 2022. So it's not too long ago that I was in your shoes, assuming that lots of you are about to start your LLB or your legal education. You're about to start university. And when I graduated, I had a training contract with the firm that I'm currently at. And alongside that, I did the SQE. So it's the new way of qualifying as a solicitor. It was brought in a few years ago now, but it is still new. Before that, it was the LPC. That was the old way of qualifying as a solicitor. So with the SQE, with the new regime, there's two exams. Well, the exams are split into two sections, I should say. First of all, you've got to pass SQE1, which is all multiple choice questions, but it's an extremely long, extremely challenging set of multiple choice questions, and that assesses your legal knowledge. Do you know the black letter law, and can you apply it to scenarios, factual patterns? And then once you've passed SQE1, you go on to SQE2, which then it still assesses that you know the law, but it also assesses your skills. So you're assessed on client interviewing, you're assessed on your advocacy, so your ability to argue a case in front of a judge. You're assessed on your legal writing, your legal drafting, everything like that. So it's the whole package. And once you've passed SQE1 and SQE2, you need to have then accumulated a total of 2 years qualifying work experience. This is one of the improvements. They changed the way that you qualified as a solicitor, as I said. Under the old regime, the LPC, you needed a formal 2 year training contract, and they're really competitive, really hard to get. Under the new regime of the SQE, you just need 2 years of qualifying work experience, which is much broader. So if you volunteer at a law clinic, and the University of Kent has its own law clinic, which you can volunteer at whilst you're studying there. So any volunteering like that, or whether it's for the Citizens Advice Bureau, whether it's a paralegal work, whether it's a vacation scheme that you've done that the employer said will count as qualifying work experience, all of that can add up and contribute to your total 2 years that you need for qualifying work experience. So for me, all of my 2 years was done in the firm that I'm now working at. I started as a paralegal and then became a trainee, offered a training contract. And that's how I got to my 2 years. So that was my route to qualification. But under the SQE regime, it is a lot broader. So again, it leans into that mindset that I've been focusing on today of thinking laterally, thinking creatively, and knowing you don't need to just apply to a really sought after training contract. By all means, go for it, and really impressive if you do. But if that option is not available to you, don't think that that's the end. That's not a door closed, because there are lots of other ways of qualifying now. So I hope that helps. Okay, somebody's asked, does going to a prestigious university matter to employers? I think it matters to some. I would say if all you're interested in is the top five or so firms in London, then I think lots of them would look at what university you went to and how prestigious it was. That's not to say if you don't go to a prestigious university, you won't get into those top five firms, because I know plenty of people that have. But I think certain firms can be more picky about what university you went to than others. But by and large, for the vast majority of firms across the country, I don't think they're interested in where you studied. I think they're much more interested in how much you know, how much you can demonstrate an interest in whatever area of law you're applying to work in, and what are you like as a candidate. Firms are very good at getting a sense of who you are as a person, what are your strengths and weaknesses. And I think you need to go to a university that you think will maximize your strength and help you plug any weaknesses. And that's not about where a university is in the rankings. You can only get a sense of whether the university is a good fit on that front by looking at the university, speaking to people that have been to different universities, and figuring out which one's the right fit for you. Okay, I think that's everything, so I'm happy to wrap it up there. But no, thank you everyone for listening. You've been a pleasure to speak to, and I wish you all the best of luck in your legal careers. Do find me on LinkedIn. I've encouraged you all to set up your LinkedIn profile, so I'll be disappointed if I don't see lots of connection requests coming into now. And I'm always willing to give a helping hand where I can to aspiring lawyers. So no, I wish you all the very best, and I'm sure I'll see you soon.